The first sensation was warmth. Sticky, humid warmth that clung to Lloyd Weathers' skin as the cryopod's seal cracked with a painful hiss. Warning lights flickered weakly across the pod's interior, barely visible through the layer of frost that had accumulated over millennia. The pod's systems sparked and whined, ancient machinery struggling to complete the revival sequence that should have been routine. Lloyd's first conscious breath in 15,000 years was a ragged gasp that sent him into a violent coughing fit. His lungs burned as they remembered their purpose, and the taste in his mouth was metallic and stale. Through blurred vision, he could see golden sunlight streaming through tears in the hull above him, illuminating dancing motes of dust in the stale air. The light shouldn't have been there at all. The awakening sequence was supposed to happen in deep space, in the carefully controlled environment of the colonial ship Horizon's cryobay. The pod's emergency systems hummed to life, injecting a cocktail of stabilizers and neural activators into his bloodstream. Each heartbeat sent pins and needles through his body as circulation returned to atrophied muscles. The medical implant in his left arm throbbed as it booted up, beginning its programmed sequence of rehabilitation protocols. "Status report," he tried to say, but his throat was too dry to produce more than a hoarse whisper. The ship's AI didn't respond. The only sounds were the crash of waves somewhere nearby, and the creaking of metal as the wreckage around him shifted in the tropical breeze. The air carried the scent of salt mixed with sweet decay, vegetation breaking down in the heat, but nothing like any plants he'd known on Earth. Through the haze of revival, his training kicked in. He was Lloyd Weathers, a survival expert of sorts, part of Colonial Group 7 bound for New Caledonia. But this wasn't New Caledonia. The gravity was wrong. He could feel it in his bones, even in his weakened state. The air pressure, the sunlight, the sounds. Nothing matched the carefully selected parameters of humanity's chosen colony world. His first attempt to move nearly made him black out. 15 millennia of inactivity had left his muscles barely functional, despite the cryopod's preservation systems. The emergency medical implant was already flooding his system with stabilizers, fighting off the worst effects of long-term stasis. He managed to pull himself up to sitting, each movement a careful battle against gravity and weakness. The cryobay was barely recognizable, twisted metal and shattered composite materials everywhere, most of the other pods either crushed or torn open. His stomach lurched when he realized he couldn't see any other survivors. Names and faces flashed through his mind. Devon Reacher, the atmospheric specialist, Captain Rich, the Singleton twins who specialized in terraforming, 200 of humanity's best and brightest, selected for their skills and genetic diversity, now reduced to this field of wreckage. The thick, humid air made every breath an effort, as Lloyd dragged himself toward the emergency supplies, still miraculously intact near his pod. The med scanner inside was designed to survive anything short of a direct antimatter containment breach. Its display flickered to life as his trembling fingers pressed against the biometric lock. The scan results scrolled across his field of vision. Severe muscle deterioration, vitamin deficiencies, minor neural pathway degradation, all expected after long-term stasis, all treatable. But then came the timestamp that changed everything. Year 1, 5, 3, 4, 7 CE. Lloyd stared at the numbers until they burned into his vision. The journey to New Caledonia was supposed to take 50 years, maximum. Even accounting for minor navigational adjustments, they should have arrived before the end of the 24th century. Something had gone catastrophically wrong during their journey, and he was looking at the result, a 15,000-year gap in human history. Using the med scanner's casing for support, he pushed himself to his feet. The world swam around him, but he forced himself to stay upright. Through the gaping holes in the hull, he could see a beach of strange purple-tinted sand stretching into the distance. Twin moons hung in the late afternoon sky, neither of them matching the astronomical data from any known system, let alone their intended destination. The horizon, or what was left of it, lay broken around him, half buried in sand and wrapped in vines bearing fruit he didn't recognize. Parts of the hull had been completely consumed by the local flora, integrated into the ecosystem of whatever world this was. 15,000 years of adaptation and growth had turned the most advanced ship humanity had ever built into little more than a scaffold for alien life. Warning: sticky, humid warmth that clung to Lloyd Weathers' skin as the cryopod's seal cracked with a painful hiss. His muscles screamed in protest as he tried to move, 15 millennia of atrophy making even the simplest gestures feel like lifting mountains. The pod's diagnostic display was dead, but shafts of golden sunlight streamed through tears in the hull above him, illuminating dancing motes of dust in the stale air. This was wrong. The awakening sequence should have happened in deep space, in the carefully controlled environment of the colonial ship Horizon's cryo bay. Instead, he could hear waves crashing somewhere nearby and smell salt air mixed with the sweet decay of tropical vegetation. Lloyd forced himself to focus through the disorientation. The emergency medical implant in his arm was already flooding his system with stabilizers, fighting off the worst effects of long-term stasis. He managed to pull himself up to sitting, taking in the devastation around him. The cryo bay was barely recognizable. Twisted metal and shattered composite materials everywhere. Most of the other pods either crushed or torn open. His stomach lurched when he realized he couldn't see any other survivors. The ship's AI should have awakened him long before this. Something had gone catastrophically wrong during their journey to New Caledonia, the carefully selected colony world that was supposed to be humanity's next home. But this wasn't New Eden. The gravity felt wrong, the air too thick, the sun too orange through the gaps in the hull. His legs nearly buckled as he made his way to the emergency supplies still miraculously intact near his pod. The med scanner inside told him what his body already knew: severe muscle deterioration, vitamin deficiencies, but nothing that the emergency regeneration treatments couldn't eventually fix. What it couldn't explain was why the date display showed Year 1, 5347 CE. Lloyd spent the first 3 days fighting his own body. The medical nanites worked tirelessly, but 15,000 years of cellular decay couldn't be undone overnight. He established a camp in what remained of the medical bay, salvaging what he could from the wreckage. His survival training proved invaluable as he analyzed the local flora, carefully testing each specimen for toxicity using the surviving medical equipment. The ship's emergency rations would last a month, maybe 2 if he stretched them. After that, he'd need to rely on the alien ecosystem for survival. The purple sand, he discovered, gained its color from microscopic organisms that processed the planet's unusual mineral content. The twin moons, he named them Phobos and Deimos after Mars' satellites, created complex tidal patterns that seemed to inflate the local wildlife's behavior. During the day, he documented everything. It was pure scientific reflex, but it gave him purpose. The planet's orange sun burned hotter than Earth's, yet the atmosphere filtered the radiation differently, creating spectacular auroral displays, even during daylight hours. The local vegetation had evolved to process this unique light spectrum, resulting in plants that seemed to shift color depending on the time of day. At night, he fought the silence. The medical nanites could rebuild his muscles, but they couldn't treat the psychological impact of his situation. Sometimes he found himself talking to the other colonists, carrying on conversations with people who had been dead for thousands of years. Captain Rich would have already started planning permanent settlements. On the fourth day, while attempting to restore power to the ship's quantum communications array, he found it. Hidden beneath layers of corrupted data and system failures, a single message had been preserved in the ship's quantum-stable memory crystals. The timestamp made his breath catch. Year 7482 CE. A transmission from Earth broadcast across the galaxy on all frequencies, preserved by the ship's automated systems, even as everything else failed. Lloyd's hands shook as he connected the playback system. Static crackled, and then a voice emerged, clear, desperate, and terrifyingly final. To any human colonies or vessels receiving this message, this is our final broadcast. I am Dr. Elena Santos, Chief of Earth Defense Operations. The entity has breached our last defenses. We have lost Mars. The lunar colonies went dark 12 hours ago. Our attempts to communicate with it have failed. Our weapons are useless. There was a pause, filled with background noise that might have been explosions. We thought we were ready. The quantum defense grid, the dark matter barriers, none of it mattered. It consumed everything in its path, converting matter and energy into something else. Something we can't even measure or comprehend. If you're receiving this, if any of our colonies or ships survived, please heed this warning. Don't try to come back. Hide, run, and whatever you do, don't let it detect your technology. We've learned that it's drawn to quantum fluctuations and to any sign of advanced civilization. Is that a nod? Alarms blared in the background of the recording. Someone shouted something unintelligible. This is humanity's last transmission from the Sol system. To whoever finds this, learn from our mistake. We reached too far too fast. We didn't understand what we were signaling to in the dark. The entity, it's not just destroying us. It's transforming everything into... The message ended in a burst of static. Lloyd played it again and again, 7 times in total before he finally accepted what he was hearing. Earth was gone, had been gone for nearly 8,000 years. The strange thing was he felt no tears. Perhaps 15 millennia of cryosleep had frozen his grief as well. He spent the rest of the day analyzing the message, breaking down every word, every background noise. His scientific mind latched onto the details: quantum fluctuations, matter transformation, the entity's apparent attraction to advanced technology. If the warning was accurate, every piece of working technology around him was potentially a beacon, drawing this incomprehensible threat's attention. That night, as the twin moons cast their purple light over the alien shore, Lloyd made a decision. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was a repository of human knowledge, perhaps the last one in existence. Every scrap of information in the ship's databanks, every memory in his head, every piece of human technology around him needed to be preserved, but also hidden. He began the process of systematically shutting down and shielding every active piece of technology, except for the essential medical systems keeping him alive. As he worked, a strange pattern caught his eye in the purple sand below the wreckage, geometric shapes that seemed too regular to be natural. At the time, he dismissed it as a trick of the moonlight. He should have looked closer. Gathering his strength and salvaging what he could from the wreckage, the medical nanites in his system worked tirelessly, rebuilding atrophied muscle tissue and repairing cellular damage. Each sunset brought the twin moons higher in the sky, their pale purple light casting eerie shadows through the alien canopy. On the 4th day, he found something that changed everything. Deep in what remained of the ship's data core, preserved by quantum-stable memory crystals, he discovered a message. It wasn't from the ship's AI, or from any of his fellow colonists. It was from Earth, broadcast across the galaxy on all frequencies, dated 7482 CE, roughly halfway through his accidental journey through time. To any human colonies or vessels receiving this message, this is our final broadcast. The entity has consumed our solar system. We couldn't stop it. If you're out there, if anyone survives, don't try to find us. Don't try to come back. Run, hide, and whatever you do, don't let it detect your technology. This is humanity's last transmission. Good. The message ended there. Lloyd played it 17 times before he finally accepted what he was hearing. Earth was gone. Humanity, at least in its cradle, had been extinct for nearly 8,000 years. The revelation about Earth's fate changed everything. Lloyd found himself measuring his actions not just for survival, but as a preservation of humanity's legacy. Each morning he documented his observations in a makeshift journal crafted from salvaged materials, careful to use only mechanical means of recording, no digital signatures that might draw unwanted attention. His survivalist training proved invaluable as he cataloged the alien ecosystem. The purple beach harbored a complex network of microbial life that seemed to communicate through chemical signals, creating shifting patterns in the sand as different colonies interacted. The local vegetation exhibited signs of distributed intelligence, with root systems that transmitted electrical signals across vast distances. This wasn't just an alien world. It was a world that might have evolved consciousness in ways humanity had never considered. 3 weeks after his awakening, Lloyd had established a sustainable routine. His base camp in the horizon's forward section provided shelter from the frequent rain showers that swept in from the orange-tinted sea. He'd identified 7 distinct species of edible fruit, though he stuck primarily to the one he named blue plums, sweet, nutrient-rich orbs that grew in abundance near the wreckage. The medical nanites in his system had finally completed their work, restoring his muscle mass and adapting his body to the planet's unique atmospheric composition. That's when he noticed the changes in the sand patterns. At first, he attributed it to natural phenomena, the complex tidal interactions of the twin moons, or perhaps the chemical communications of the microbial colonies he'd observed. But these were different. The geometric shapes appeared with mathematical precision, forming and reforming over days in what he gradually realized was a systematic progression of complexity. Binary code, Fibonacci sequences, the gravitational constants of standard stellar bodies. Each morning brought new patterns, each more sophisticated than the last, each moving closer to his camp. Someone, or something, was attempting to communicate through mathematical principles. On the 28th day, Lloyd woke to find his entire world transformed. The purple sand for half a kilometer in every direction had been transformed into an impossibly detailed mathematical model. At its center was a perfect replica of the horizon's original landing trajectory, showing its intended path to New Caledonia and the gravitational anomaly that had diverted it. Surrounding this was a star map of unimaginable scope, showing the movement of stellar bodies over the 15,000 years he had slept. As Lloyd stood studying the patterns, his scientific mind racing to comprehend their implications, the air above the diagram began to change. It started as a subtle distortion, like heat waves rising from hot sand. But this was different, controlled, structured, purposeful. The distortion took on geometric patterns that matched the ones in the sand, but in 3 dimensions, shifting and flowing with liquid grace. Then came the voice. If it could be called a voice, it was more like the feeling of words forming directly in his mind, accompanied by colors he had no names for, and concepts that seemed to twist the edges of his consciousness. We have been waiting. Adigasta telemi. Lloyd felt no fear, only a profound sense of recognition. The patterns in the sand, the mathematical communications, they weren't just messages. They were tests. Whatever intelligence he was dealing with, it had wanted to ensure he could comprehend basic scientific principles before making direct contact. Your ship's arrival was predicted. Your sleep was protected. There is much to share. Questions flooded Lloyd's mind. Had they been here all along? Were they responsible for the Horizon's survival? Did they know about Earth, about the entity? And the geometric patterns in the air shifted again, forming what looked like a doorway made of light and mathematical equations. Beyond it, Lloyd could see something that his mind struggled to process, structures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than should be possible. Some of your kind survived, scattered, hidden. The entity seeks. We preserve. Choose now. The breaker waits to find the choice it cannot find. The valiant safe. Lloyd stared at the doorway of light, then back at the wreckage of the horizon, his last connection to Earth and humanity's past. In the sand at his feet, new patterns were forming, showing stellar configurations he didn't recognize, and mathematical concepts that hinted at technologies far beyond anything humanity had achieved. He took a step forward, and then another. Whatever lay through that portal, whatever these beings were offering, it represented something he'd thought lost forever. Hope. The doorway of light welcomed him with colors that had no names. To be continued. 3 weeks after his awakening, Lloyd had established a base camp in the remains of the ship's forward section. He'd identified several edible fruit species, set up water collection systems, and begun mapping the coastline. The planet's ecosystem was complex but not immediately hostile. Though he'd seen some fascinating predators in the distance, they seemed to avoid the ship's wreckage. That's when he found the markings. At first he thought they were natural formations in the purple sand, geometric patterns that appeared and disappeared with the tides. But they were too regular, too precise, and they were changing day by day, growing more complex, moving closer to his camp. On the morning of the 28th day, he woke to find a perfect replica of his ship's original landing trajectory carved into the beach, alongside what could only be a star map. Someone, or something, was trying to communicate. And as Lloyd stood studying the markings, a shimmer in the air caught his attention. The space above the patterns began to distort, like heat waves rising from hot sand. But this was different, deliberate, intelligent. He wasn't alone on this world, and whatever was here with him had been waiting a very, very long time for someone to wake up. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it a lot. If you did, please be sure to give it a like. Feel free to comment and share this story too. It helps the channel grow. Let's make this channel huge together.